I've been listening to music since before I was born. While I was still in the womb, my mother constantly played music. When I was little, my great-aunt Robin and her wife Roxana played music in different languages and genres. By the time I was 5, I had memorized quite a few of the counting songs, including in French, Spanish, Swahili, and Japanese. I started playing the cello 7 years ago when I was in 2nd grade and 7 years old. In less than a year, I had composed what I thought was my first piece ever. In reality, it was my first composition for cello. Robin and Roxana told me that my first composition ever had been when I was 2. I made up a victory song that I sang whenever I won something. I don't have a recording, but Robin and Roxana told me that it was always the same, even the nonsensical lyrics. At some point, it occurred to me that I might want to write down my music so that I wouldn't forget it. In the beginning, I knew very little about proper music notation, and I hadn't learned where and what all the notes were on the staff. So when I wrote down my first piece, I used my own system. It consisted of writing the names of the notes inside circles and adding a little triangle under some of the circles if the name of the note was the same but an octave up or down. At the time it seemed logical and obvious to me, but now it seems really confusing. Now I have no idea how to play what I wrote, but I'm not too disappointed about it because it wasn't the best composition anyway. After all, it mostly consisted of open strings with no distinct melodies or rhythms, which is pretty hard to follow or relate to. I suppose you could call it contemporary music. A few months more into playing the cello, and I was able to read music in the standard notation sufficiently. At this point, I began to write down many compositions by hand. I also thought out my compositions more, and they were more musical. I had trouble figuring out how to end them, and most of them remained unfinished, but the practice of writing them out by hand and playing them from the paper helped me learn how to write down the correct rhythms in my pieces. When I compose, I usually start by having a tune stuck in my head. Sometimes I'm practicing the cello and I come up with a great idea that makes me conveniently cease practicing to go write down the tune. Somehow I never end up practicing after I write down the tune because I conveniently realize I need to work on it for hours on end. After I come up with an idea, I try to form harmonies around it. Since the tune is usually on the cello, I add other instruments to the mix. Sometimes I'll add violins and a viola, other times I'll add piano or even compose something for an orchestra, which can include strings such as violin, violas, cello, and basses, or winds and brass such as clarinet, oboe, flute, horns, and tuba. For symphony orchestras, which have strings, winds, brass, and percussion such as timpani, bass drum, and cymbals, I find that I like writing stuff for the bass drum a little too much. There is something about the resonating sound of the bass drum, and low notes in general, that really speaks to me. A few years ago, I found a free online notating site called Noteflight after searching for something like it forever. Now, instead of having to write down compositions by hand, I am able to use the computer to speed up the process. The site gives me musical instruments to choose from, such as cello, piano, and flute, as well as ways to play those instruments, including dynamics, loud or soft, articulation, how a note is played, tempo, the speed of the piece, and time signature, how many beats to a measure. I now have the upgrade for the site, which allows me to have access to more instruments and better sound quality, such as a cello that does not sound like an accordion, as well as a higher limit on the amount of scores I can compose on. The site has allowed me to write down music ideas more quickly and also have them be played back to me so I know how they sound before they have been played by real musicians. Real musicians have played many of my compositions over the years. I first premiered one of my compositions called Lament in 2013 at my final recital with Wayland School of Music when I was 11 years old. I also bring a considerable number of compositions with me to Apple Hill, the summer music camp I've gone to since 2014. There, I play some of them with other musicians and perform some of them as a part of the evening activities. The Apple Hill String Quartet professionally recorded one of my string quartets. About a month ago, my first piano quartet premiered in the Rivers Conservatory's Contemporary Music Seminar, along with piano quartets by other students required as part of the composition class I'm taking in the conservatory program. When I'm composing seriously, I like my pieces to sound classical, because that's my favorite genre of music. Since last year, I have also been into pop music, and as a result, I have begun to compose songs more often. Completing compositions is still a challenge for me, but if there's a deadline, which, by the way, there usually isn't, I manage to get it completed in time. I compose because it allows me to express myself in a way that words cannot. It also gives me an outlet, so that when I feel a strong emotion, such as happiness, sadness, anger, or frustration, I can turn to composing to express that emotion or to make me feel better. Composing is one of my hobbies, as well as a part of my identity. I couldn't stop composing if I wanted to, because I would still hear melodies circling around in my head, begging me to write them down and give them substance, and promising to drive me insane if I didn't comply. Sometimes I don't even realize I'm composing until I notice I'm tapping out a rhythm on a table that is the same rhythm that I did yesterday and the day before. I am grateful that music is such a big part of my life, and I hope to continue growing in my composing and in music in general. Thank you. And now I'm going to play Lament, which I first premiered when I was 11 years old.